Today I want to talk about something that is related to how I'm learning kanji, and my approach to learning kanji has been changing recently, actually. So over the last several months, it's been evolving as I learn how to learn Japanese, as I figure out what works for me and what doesn't. And so I've been modifying my approach and my flashcards to that extent. I'm going to talk about all of that in much greater detail in another video in the future. But today I want to touch on something that I think merits its own discussion. And that something is a topic with a rather unsexy name of kanji production. And so what is that? What is kanji production and who cares? Why is this important? Kanji production is the opposite of kanji comprehension. So if we think about flashcards in the most basic terms, you can have two different kinds of tests. And you have comprehension, which means you look at a word and you know what it means. And you have the opposite, which is you have an object in mind, like a cell phone, keitai denwa, and the idea of the production flashcard is to recall the characters for that word. In other words, to produce the character. So this topic came to my attention several months ago in the comments section of one of the videos that I made. And in that video, I discussed the different flashcards I was using for kanji. And I was using a lot of flashcards at the time for production. And the argument that was brought up was, well, look, in today's day and age, you don't really need to write out anything in Japanese by hand. So you'll probably not run into that situation this year. And if you're trying to get through a lot of material in a short amount of time, your time might be better spent elsewhere. So in other words, don't worry about production and just worry about reading, because that's what really counts. So I thought that was an interesting point, and I thought it was worth exploring. And I had to spend some time thinking deeply about my own goals and my own wants with kanji. And I had to ask myself really honestly, what do I really want? Like, if I peel back all the layers of motivation, what is it that's important that I'd be able to come out this year being able to do with kanji? And I determined from that first of all, I didn't care at all about writing stuff out by hand. I mean, I think learning the calligraphy as an art is a great thing, and I think the characters are beautiful, and I think it's all positive stuff. Like, even for your Japanese learning, if you learn how to write stuff out, you're going to be better off for it. My only thing is that I'm limited on time, since I want to do a bunch of stuff in 1 year. Ultimately, what I determined was that what was important was that I'd be able to read kanji, and as far as production goes, that I'd be able to type it. So since I can use the English alphabet, as long as I know how to pronounce a word, as long as I still test myself on the oral production of a word, then in theory, isn't that enough? Because if my reading skills, my comprehension skills are still good, then I should be able to kind of choose the right kanji from the autocorrect and sort of proofread myself in that way. So then I went to Reddit with this in mind, explained the situation and asked how important is kanji production if my goals are only reading and typing. And the responses that I got were very opinionated and very polarized. So they were very strong on either one side or the other. And so you have people saying on one hand, yes, that's exactly why I'm not testing myself on kanji production. You don't need it. I'm getting by fine without it, and you should just do that. On the other hand, you have plenty of people saying the opposite, saying, well, you're just not going to be able to read. If you don't do production, you're missing out on a very important part. You don't understand what you're talking about. And also, one very good point that I thought they brought up was, if you don't know the stroke order and all of the pieces of a kanji, it's going to be very hard, if not impossible, for you to read handwritten kanji. And I thought that's a very solid point in favor of that argument. So with all of that in mind, I still didn't really have a consensus, that I didn't have any direction as far as what was the best thing to do. So at that point, I decided to do my own experiment and just see how it worked for me personally. I made a batch of flashcards for, say, like 50 words or so. And for those 50 words, I removed all of the production flashcards. I was still testing myself on oral production, but I cut out all of the kanji production stuff. The results for me were, one, I was able to get rid of a lot of flashcards with little to no effect on my reading abilities. And the second thing was that I was able to find a breaking point, actually, where this whole approach does fall apart. And so I found that there is a point that where too little production is a bad thing. And this is still with the goal of only being able to comprehend and type kanji. So even only wanting to read kanji, I still have to do a little bit of production in order for my reading to be good, which is interesting. So I found that breaking point, which is good because now I know what the real minimum that I can get away with is. The basic thing that I found was, first of all, use a lot of mnemonics and test yourself in both directions always for those. And so I've been using a lot more mnemonics for kanji. So in a way that's sort of replaced some of the production cards I've had. So I'm using images not only for radicals, but also for combinations of 2 or 3 radicals, and also for combinations of combinations. And so you can keep pushing this concept further and keep zooming out and assigning a single image to a bigger and bigger chunk of information. And if you take this far enough, you can actually assign, for example, a single image to a whole character. And of course, you can only do this after you've broken it down into its pieces and learned those, but you can then zoom out and assign a whole image to a character. And so those extra mnemonics have been really useful for me. And the other part of this breaking point is something that I found I always have to do. And it's not something I discovered until actually a couple of months after I started the experiment. So when I began, I wasn't doing any production and everything was going great. Everything was working just fine. I could still read and comprehend. And it wasn't until a couple months later that those words were much earlier and much older in my brain. And I started to see flashcards. I started to see words written in kanji where I'm looking at it going, I have no idea what this is. I recognize these characters, but I have no idea what this combination means. And that started to happen more and more frequently. And what I found was that in pretty much every case, those were words where I didn't test myself on production. And so what I found that I have to do is I have to have one kanji production test, one kanji production flashcard at the very end of learning that word that tests me on the full combination for that word. So for example, if the word is keitai denwa that has 4 characters in it, I need to be able to recall all 4 of those pieces accurately. So in summary, I found that I was able to cut out a lot of those production flashcards. I found that there was a breaking point that even if your goal is only comprehension, you do have to do some production, or I should say I have to do some production. This may depend on the person. And that breaking point, that minimum effective dose for me is using a lot of mnemonics where I'm always testing myself in both directions and testing myself on the final kanji combination or the final kanji spelling for a word. I do think that this might depend on what you like and what your goals are. So the idea here is not to tell you what to do, but here's my experience, and I wanted to share that because there's not a lot of info out there on this. But I'd also love to hear your opinions, and I think that other viewers would find that useful in the comments section below. So there are my thoughts on kanji production, and in another video I will go over everything that has changed in my kanji approach, which is not too drastically different from what I've been doing the whole time. So it's not a huge upgrade or change, but I have made some tweaks that have been helping me. So I'll talk all about that next time. Until then, thanks for watching and hope this was useful. Talk to you later. Bye.